All right, welcome to chapter number 4. Today we're going to cover the first 3 questions in the Guide to Readings. Questions like, what were 2 reasons for the Albany Congress? Question number 2, and this is going to have 2 parts, so make sure you get both the parts. Why were the British colonials concerned about the French? So why were the British concerned about the French? And why were the Iroquois concerned about the British? So as we're trying to make this alliance that we're going to talk about, we're going to say there's concerns on all sides. And what factor leads to settlements of the backcountry? Whoops. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Albany Conference. In 1754, June of 1754, all the colonies sent representatives to Albany, as well as the Iroquois and the tribes that the Iroquois has united. And they try to strike this balance, this alliance. Ben Franklin is one that really comes up with this idea, and they want to get the Indian tribes all on the same page with the colonies. So we're all kind of fighting in the same direction. So that was kind of one of the reasons. We want to get all those neighboring tribes on board. The other purpose was to try to get some colonial alliance between all the different colonies. The reasons for this were pretty substantial, pretty evident. There had been a long-standing rivalry between France and Great Britain for years and years and years, about 100 years, and this includes their colonies. So remember, the French have colonies like in what's now Canada. They're also going to have westward colonies in like the Ohio River Valley. So we're going to see the French kind of surround the British colonies. They don't have nearly the amount of people. Let's face that. But it's a threat nonetheless. Usually people consider that kind of a sign of aggression to make that move. Now, whoops. There's a couple of reasons why exactly the British colonies are concerned about the French. And first of all, the French have this kind of monopoly on the fur trade. Great Britain is kind of completely left out, and French trading posts are continuing to grow and grow and grow. Remember, we talked about in the last chapter how England really wants to get more revenue from its American colonies, and they see this kind of encroachment by the French as a major obstacle to that economic enrichment. So they're a little worried about the growing number of trading posts that France seems to be popping up. They're trading more with Native Americans. Again, they have a monopoly on the fur trade. All of this seems, again, a little frustrating for the British. The French are building forts extremely close. They seem this extremely threatening. Not only that, but because they're establishing settlements in these areas, it makes it more difficult for for the English to expand westward. We're going to talk in a little bit about a little bit of overpopulation. People need to kind of go outside of those initial towns that are built on the coast. They need to start going inwards, and they find that the French colonies are impeding their ability to expand westward, or at least placing a little bit of a limit on that. So that makes them a little nervous. The Iroquois are kind of, again, one of the reasons for the conference in Albany is to get the Iroquois to side with England and only England. And from the Iroquois' position, they're a little concerned about Great Britain for kind of that reason, that there's going to be no French trade. It's only going to be a monopoly with Great Britain, and this worries them a little bit that they're going to be beholden to only one group of people. They are also, and again, they don't necessarily want to run the French out of North America because they feel like the French have protected them for a couple of reasons. One, because French settlements are built to stop that westward expansion, and a lot of the Iroquois feel like that's a protection for us, that those English settlements aren't going to come encroach on our property and make us lose property. The other thing that they feel protected about is the French military is pretty darn good. So they feel like if there's a fight between the French and the British, there's not going to be a fight between the British and the Native Americans. The Europeans fight amongst themselves, so be it. Okay. The end result of the Albany Conference is pretty interesting. They actually get, like, the colonial representatives there get the Iroquois and it's the surrounding tribes that are there to agree. They agree that, like, yes, we're going to go ahead and we're going to unite. Oddly enough, the colonies refuse to do that. The different representatives from all the different colonies throughout the United States, or what's going to be the United States, they refuse to unify. They don't necessarily trust each other. So people from Georgia don't necessarily trust the people that live in New York. They're really afraid of giving up any of their independence, and they refuse to kind of agree to this unity. So it kind of shows what's going on in the colonies in the 1700s. There is a major difference in the colonies, a difference in religions, a difference in where people are coming over, like what their backgrounds are, like if they're coming from Germany or Ireland or England, or where exactly in the world they're coming from, because they're coming from a lot of different spots. Like I said, they practice many different religions. So there's a lot of differences that are kind of popping up in the colonies, and this is a major highlight that this is happening. Now, we kind of talked about immigrants. There are people coming from all over, from Slavic countries, from France, from Germany, from Great Britain, all Scottish people that settled in Ireland and aren't liking their choice. So we have people coming in from all over the place. They're pouring in. Slaves, remember, are immigrants to the United States, not by choice, but by force. This increases the population. So this increase in immigration, the increase of slaves that are coming over, and then the natural birth rates between 1700 and 1775 are skyrocketing. Like, the average family has between 5 and 8 kids that reach maturity. So it's not like just they have kids. Remember, back in the early colonial days, they had a lot of kids, but they had a lot of kids that died in the first, days and weeks and months. We have a lot of kids that are reaching maturity. So the population is skyrocketing, which means there is a crowding of these seaward towns that have been created. Remember, we talked about, particularly in Massachusetts, they got like 150 acres of land, and a lot of people parceled some of it off for future generations to give to their ancestors. Well, again, after a couple of generations kind of come to go, you can only stretch 150 acres so far. I mean, if we all want to farm on it, and I have a bunch of kids and they have kids, and all of a sudden it's like we're not really, there's not really land to give. So they're seeing kind of a shortage of land, major limits on land ownership, which is kind of a big deal. They also have found that they made some unwise decisions as far as when they farmed, how much they farmed, and the fertility of the soil is starting to show some major decline. So they've kind of savaged, ravaged the land. They don't really know the techniques to rejuvenate the land, which there are. They're going to find out soon, but they don't know it at the time. So people start to think about expanding westward. Like, we have to move out of our town if we want to, if we want land for our kids, if we want to spread out. Westward, there was cheaper land, a lot of cheaper land. But we're going to find with the cheaper land, they don't necessarily have, like, sources to water. So to ship, like, a big backlog of products to move to markets was pretty cost prohibitive, because they didn't have access to water, and to do it over land was really, really expensive. So that's not really a very good option. So really what a lot of these people do is they do what's called subsistence farming. They have, again, smaller tracts of land, and they farm basically just for their families, so we can feed our family. Usually they have enough maybe to share with, they can trade with some people close by, so it's not like I'm eating corn for 365 days a year. So we can have, like, wheat to make bread and all these other things. We can make subtle trades, but really I'm just growing enough to feed my family with a little bit of profit to buy some things, or a little bit extra trade for other goods that we might want to use. When you practice subsistence farming, that means that usually there's not a lot of money for profit, so you don't have money to hire farmhands, you don't have money to invest in slaves. very few, really nobody pretty much had slaves in the backwoods area, because they just didn't make the money. They didn't have the money to invest in a slave. Now maybe you're going to get a farm that's a little bit bigger. There's always somebody that's a little bit more successful than everybody else. So there might have been a couple that could afford one, or maybe two if they really struck it rich as far as backwoods farming is concerned. But the the overwhelming majority really didn't have any slaves. Those were really limited to the plantations that we talked about that are in the land that really has already kind of been taken. Okay. Isolation of the backcountry is a major problem. Like, it's usually a long ways to get to those bigger cities, churches, again, taverns. So it takes a while, like a day's worth of trip to get to these places. So you really are pretty isolated. You don't see a lot of other human beings. There's kind of a joke that goes along where a farmer's kind of out there and says, we got to clear all these trees away so at least we can see our neighbors, because they're so far away we can't really see them, so we got to clear a path for vision at least. That's a problem. There's a lot of crude behavior in the backcountry. A lot of people marrying or mating before they're wed. A lot of people drink to excess. A lot of fighting, like brawling, going on. So the behavior is a little less refined in the backcountry. Churches have a hard time being established. Usually the churches in like the cities are the ones that kind of curtail this behavior. Not to say that the people in the backwoods aren't religious. They are, but they don't necessarily have the means to formal religion, because there's not enough people around to draw like a preacher in that wants to live like that and kind of commit to that church. So it's a little bit of a problem. There's also a lack of leadership. We talked about this idea of the Southern gentleman, like the people that owned the plantations are kind of like the city leaders and the, maybe the preachers. There really isn't that person. Like we said, there might be one or two people that I got a little bit more than everybody else, but and they were the ones that were called to be in the, the assembly for the state or the head of the militia. But it's really a kind of a lack of leadership in the backcountry. That's a bit of a problem for sure. So, okay. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to contact me. If not, I will see you around for video number 2.